It's 7:30, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. I am Fatima Kamara. I'm the chair for the 1987 committee. And what does the 1987 committee do? We platform diverse leadership and practical policy conversation that connects politics to people and have sort of candid conversations with various people, whether MPs, political leaders, change makers, and bridging that gap within diversity and inclusion in politics and across the board. Tonight, we're with and privileged to have Ruth Jones MP. Ruth is also the chair of the Welsh Affairs Committee. Ruth started her journey as an NHS physiotherapist and now quite involved in politics. She was also the former Shadow Air Quality Minister, and she chairs the she's the chair of the Welsh Affairs Committee. So I would like to welcome Ruth on board, but first of all, to say thank you to Chamber UK and Politics UK for facilitating conversations like this. If you're not sure what Chamber UK and Politics UK do, they publish and broadcast political insight and analysis around the country about politics and very interesting conversations and data as well. I would also want to thank you for joining us. We're now online fully. It was supposed to be an online and face-to-face event, but things change quite rapidly, as it does in politics. And so we're online, and so you can join from the comfort of wherever you are. So welcome on board, and thank you for your time, Ruth. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for this In Conversation series with the 1987 and Politics UK and Chamber UK as well.
Thank you very much, Fatima. It's great to be here this evening. And apology, yeah, because it was a bit of a, are we doing it online or are we doing it in face-to-face? Face-to-face I love because you get to see people, but obviously online, if it had to be, it had to be. That's fine.
Thank you so much. Ruth, I wanted to start off with asking you how you started your journey in politics. I am always interested to hear about people's, political journey, but also where they've come from, because we've all come from various angles, various professions. But how did you get involved in politics, but also your early political influences as well?
Oh gosh, well that will take me an hour and a half at least. So there we are. But let me start off with the easy bit, how I got involved. As a physiotherapist, I worked as a physio for 32 years. And then I became a trade union full-time officer. And in both roles, you're advocating for people, so you're representing patients or clients or staff, and I was into that role of advocating for people. And then I realized that, you know what? You can't always control what's going on as a trade union rep or as a physio. You need to get higher up the food chain to actually make a difference. So that's when I thought, hang on a minute, I need to go into Parliament to actually affect the legislation. So that was the important bit. And then the journey was, I stood a couple of times in a seat I knew I wasn't going to win, but it was good experience and it was brilliant for me to learn how to do things properly. And then I decided I was too old to do everything else, so I'm not going to do any more. And then my lovely MP, Paul Flynn, became seriously ill and sadly died. And I've lived in his constituency for the best part of my life and been a member for more than 20 years. And I thought, do you know what? I'll give it a go. And if I don't get it, then that's fine. I can retire and I can do my garden and do a bit of knitting, and that'll be lovely. So I then applied to become selected, and I was very fortunate. I got selected, and then we had a by-election, and then I came in 2019 in April. And then, as you say, the rest is history. But coming from South Wales, my political heroes obviously would be people like Nye Bevan, Neil Kinnock, lots of people from my patch who were brilliant orators and passionate and powerful and really strong advocates for their local community. I don't say I'm a brilliant orator, but I would like to think I'm passionate. A representative of my patch. Yeah.
Fantastic. I think that gives a sort of rounded perspective in terms of what you've done, how you got into politics. And it's interesting how you mentioned, you tried a couple of times to be an MP, but both times you were unsuccessful. And then how everything pans out that you're now an MP. That leads me quite nicely to my next question, which is, when I've shared about this event and sharing and talking to yourself, a lot of people were asking, what does it mean, the Welsh Affairs Committee, and how does that tie in with Westminster? So for those who are logged in and listening to this, I know, it'd be really helpful to actually steer the conversation, but also just to mention as well, if you have any questions, the chat box is open. Please feel free to ask. Just pin your questions away. We've got people who are monitoring the chat box, so your questions will be asked to Ruth. So just feel free to ask questions, please. There's no right or wrong or rhyme or rhythm to this. Just, as usual, just feel free to ask. So what would you say, Ruth, is the difference for someone who's listening and thinking, I don't understand this, how does Welsh Affairs Committee works within Westminster? For some of us who are around that space, we take it for granted that everyone understands. So I would also want to just kind of build that sort of foundation from yourself, and actually in explaining your role and what the Welsh Affairs Committee does, and how that all ties in with Westminster.
Sure, yeah, thank you, Fatima. And I suppose the majority of work that we do in Parliament is consensual, in partnership. We work across parties, but you often don't get that impression because it's always Prime Minister's questions and we shout and you shout and we shout, and it's all a bit. Whereas the majority of the work is done in committees, whether it's in a legislative committee looking at a bill to make sure it's passed. And it's the widest it possibly can. It covers all the good points, and we weed out the bad points. But select committees are entities in themselves. So we've got Defence Committee, Justice, Women and Equality. We've got lots and lots of different equalities. And we're made up of a variety of people. So for instance, on the Welsh Affairs Select Committee at the moment, we've got something like 5 Labour MPs, 3 Plaid Cymru MPs, 1 Conservative and 1 Lib Dem. And me, there we are. But we work together, and I think that's the important thing. We work together to look at what's happening, what's affecting people in Wales. So we're looking at prisons, probation and rehabilitation. That's one inquiry. We're looking at the economic regeneration of the coal fields and the steel industry. That's another one. And we do various one-offs. We question the Secretary of State for Wales, obviously, twice a year. We also invite the First Minister from the Senedd in Wales to come in front of us. And so far, they've always come when they've been invited, which is brilliant. So we work quite closely with our Welsh Senedd colleagues, but we also work as a team. So it's not just Labour or whoever's in government. It's all about making sure we get the best. And we tease out the issues that affect the people in Wales. So we're just about to complete a farming inquiry now, which is looking at the impact of various things, including trade, but also the inheritance tax on the farmers in Wales and their communities. And that will be a really powerful piece of work, hopefully, because it will shine a light on the Welsh farmers, which are different to the English farmers, and I think that's really important. So as a committee, it's that consensual politics and working together, which is really important. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense, because I think within Westminster that's quite different, isn't it? That sort of setup where you're working, your party focus in that regard is the Labour. Even though you work quite extensively jointly together, but you're more focus on your party and working together as a team, if you want to call it that, to kind of achieve the common good for everyone. So in Wales, that is slightly different based on what you've experienced. It's actually pulling together and making sure everything is done in that sort of collaborative way, in terms of inclusion and diversity. And I'm sure with that sort of approach comes its challenges, like everything else. right? It comes with its challenges. And I also know that your committee is currently, juggling with the still issues, healthcare backlogs, energy transition, and also not forgetting the post-Brexit trade and the transport links and all of that. And I know that, the leaders of that also is decided, in Westminster, and actually you having to do the policy side of it. So if you could land one sort of binding recommendation in each of those sort of inquiries this year. So for example, the steel, the health, the trade, and the transport, what would that be? And what would be the single recommendation that would stack up for your chairmanship to be able to move forward, or to move forward first?
Sure. Yeah. No. So let me just. So all select committees work across the parties. So it's like every select committee will, whether it's defence or women require, everybody works together to try and get the best and to question the witnesses in front of them. But in terms of looking at steel, in fact, steel tariffs, because it's such a live issue, we're not looking at that at the moment, but we will be looking at it after the US tariffs to look at the impacts and say, well, look, how can we ameliorate, how can we make things better? So steel is one thing which we set aside, but in fact, we discussed today looking at cross-border health. So for instance, the border between England and Wales is porous. People go across the border for, say, education, and the other way for health, all that sort of thing. It's not a very firm line, which is as it should be. It should be porous. So we're looking at how do we make sure that people on both sides of the border get the best of all worlds. And I think that's quite tricky because obviously the funding for, say, health or education is devolved. So we don't want to trample on the Senate's toes, but at the same time, we want to make sure that that border is working for both sides of, in Wales and England. And sometimes that can be, it's an interesting one to tease out. What are the intricacies of, people from England like to have a GP registered in Wales because they get free prescriptions, so that's that's quite important. And obviously, if you're going to a hospital in Wales, you get free hospital car parking. But if you've got to go to a specialist centre, say, for instance, you live in Newport, say in part of my patch, and you have a child with a cancer and you have to go to Bristol, you have to pay, and pay for car parking and things like that. So it's understanding there are differences between the health systems and the education systems, but that's what devolution is all about. Yeah.
Very interesting. Just the two things that you've mentioned about, the car park and actually, the prescription social charge that people might not really know about, and how that affects, sort of the movement of people, whether in your patch or just going across the board. And even I think it gets to a point where some people might even, depend on what it is, are really happy to just move, full shop to just actually be in that space, because actually if they are going to be needing health services that much, it's worth the move. So that also leads me slightly to your experience within the NHS, and especially with all the changes going on. And I know you worked in the NHS for over 30 years. That's a long time, and I'm sure you've seen all the different changes and everything that's happened. I think in your sort of stint within the NHS would have happened. What are your thoughts in terms of how, sort of the NHS in England as we have it? And what are your thoughts in terms of someone who's worked in the NHS? What do you think the changes that, should happen to make sure that we can address sort of the ever-changing, NHS landscape, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as a member of staff, I was always part of a team. So even though when I finished, I was a manager of a team of 50, I could never have done that job without the cooperation of the team, and knowing that within that team of physiotherapists, they were also admin, there were support workers, the cleaners, the porters, everybody had to work together to make sure we got the best for the patient or the client that we were working with. And I think it's that teamwork, that sort of spirit of getting through things, which is so important. And I think And don't get me wrong, I think Wes is doing a great job as Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, because it's a massive job, and health. Everybody knows somebody who is affected by a health, whether it's a hip replacement, whether it's a neurological condition, whether it's a breathing issue or mental health. Everybody knows somebody, and somebody will have a good news story and somebody will have a bad news story. So I think we just need to make sure we learn from each other, and it's not about I'm going to keep things secret. I'm not going to tell you what worked well. I think in Wales, the contracts for NHS workers specifically say, or when I was working, they said you must share best practice, because you shouldn't keep it yourself. If it works, share it with other people. Don't waste people's time. Don't reinvent the wheel 40 times. Get on with it and build on that best practice to make it even better. And I think it's that collaborate. Same as here, when in a select committee, you work together. In the NHS, you should work together to make sure you get the best for your patient or client. And I think that's critical, no matter what level you're at, whether you're a consultant, whether you're a hospital porter or a domestic. It's really important that we all work together, because we can't do it without each other.
Fantastic. And the NHS being easily the largest employer in the UK, we need to work together. We need to work with each other. And in your view, what are the most important areas of healthcare reform within this government that is now being faced, where how do you think that can be implemented, for example, or managed in Wales?
So, I mean, health is a massive issue. So you go from acute medicine, and I think that's one of the things. The NHS is a national health service, but at the moment it seems to be a national sick service. So you're basically looking after people who are sick. And we should be looking at far more preventative health promotion, ill health prevention. Those are the important things, because we want people to live long, happy and healthy lives. Because it's no good living to the age of 90 if you're bedbound for 10 years. That's not what we want from people. We want the 95-year-olds to be out there having a walk, enjoying life, being part of communities. So I think that's really important. But those things step outside of a parliamentary term. So you can't talk about health promotion and just limit it to a parliamentary term, because you put money in now, you won't see a return for 20 years. So, for instance, the smoking ban, or not ban, but the smoking green paper, then white paper, came out in the late 70s, early 80s, to look at linking cancers with nicotine and all the rest of it. But that didn't actually show results for 30 years, because people were still smoking until they went, oh, hang on a minute. But then you don't see the decrease in cancers for maybe 20 years. So you have to have a long-term view on health. Also, the other part I would make is it's health and social care, because you can't have the two systems running separately. They have to run together. And I think that's one of the other big issues is we talk about bed blockers, which is a bad term, delayed transfers of care, but that's in effect to get people out of hospital, to allow people, get people out the back way into social care and suitable placement, so that people in the front end don't have to wait in ambulances for hours on end or sit in the waiting area. And that's another challenge, because social care is a massive issue in itself. And I know this government is grappling with it, and I'm very glad I'm not in the health team. So.
I think, you've made a valid point about, there's no NHS or even healthcare without sorting out social care. They both, need to be worked out and sorted out jointly. But also, I think where you mentioned about Wes also having sort of the national care service, because that would address the health side of it and hopefully social care. But also when we talk about social care, there's quite a lot to unpick within social care. But then there's also the issue where sort of the investment that needs to go into the economic growth of the economy, and what does that look like? And I think in terms of investment in Wales, for example, do you think, I'm just thinking aloud, where Labour's growth agenda funding impacting and delivering for Welsh for the UK. Do you think in Wales? How do you think that has been, implemented? And what are your challenges, or what are your views as chair of the committee? What would you say about that?
So certainly, I mean, speaking as an MP who's lived in Wales vast majority of my life, I know that the problem is we've got an older, sicker population than, say, England as a whole. So our population will die younger, live worse quality of life because they're sicker, they have various diseases and whatever. So that's an issue for Wales as a whole, coupled with the fact that we are losing the younger generation. So they're going maybe to university in England or wherever, but they don't come back. My two children have gone away. My son went to Manchester Uni. He's not come back. My daughter's a doctor. She's a doctor in England. She's not come back. And you just think, we need these people. We need young people, at the very basic level to look after our older people. So I'm not going to get into the immigration. Well, I can do, but we need people to come into Wales to care for our older, sicker population. And that is a problem in Wales, which is probably not a problem, say, in London or Birmingham, but in Wales it is an issue. Yeah.
Wow. And how do you think that can be addressed? I know it's a UK-wide problem because in terms of recruitment, we have, I think last time I checked, someone who works at the NHS myself and have worked for a long time, is that, we've got, I think last time was over 80,000 vacancies. And now with all the changes and all the immigration issues, and now we've had, post-Brexit, and we've had COVID. So COVID is I call it the BNC. So it's the Brexit and then the COVID, so is the BNC, the effect of the BNCs. How do you see that, and how can that be resolved? So what would you, for example, champion in Wales for to happen that can address that? Because then it's inevitable. It would be a dire situation. It's not going to get better. It's not getting better. Certainly not in England or in London, because cost of living is expensive. And also, how do we ensure that diversity and inclusion plays a role where someone can say, I want to optics to go to Wales, and I'll be able to have a better life, be able to integrate it within that community. And what does that look like for them?
Oh, wow, that's a big question, Fatima. I could take another hour and a half to answer that. I think in terms of Wales, I think the Welsh government they put into legislation the fact that Wales is a country of sanctuary. And I think that's quite important to say all are welcome, which is going against the rhetoric that's out there in terms of England in quite a strong way. My mum was recently in hospital as she broke a hip, and the care staff, the nurses, the doctors, the vast majority were from overseas. They were non-white from overseas, and they were brilliant. They were absolutely superb. And I don't know where we'd be without them, because to be frank, we don't have enough people in Wales to actually staff the post. As you said, 80,000 vacancies across is a massive, massive job to fill. And I think we need to be honest with people and say, we need people to come in, because I am going to get into immigration now, but if people come in who've got skills, who are nurses and doctors, and I've met refugees and asylum seekers who are lawyers and doctors and teachers, and they want to come to our country because basically they've been bombed out or persecuted, or they've got drought or famine, they can't live in their own country, and they've been granted indefinite leave to remain. Why would they not work here? And they're desperate to work. And I just get so, yes, come on, let's get them in. I think my frustration is it can take years to get your right to remain, your legislative papers to come through. And during that time, you're not working. You're existing on a pittance. You're dealing with your family. You've got nothing. It's bad for your mental health. It's bad for your physical health. It's bad for your family. It's, why don't we say, look, come in and work? Get your papers sorted out. We can do that. That's not difficult. But then you can work, because they don't want, somebody said in my country, oh, they're coming here taking my job. And I said, well, I'm not being funny. You've been retired 20 years. They're not taking your job. They are filling a vacancy, which is not your job. And they don't want your job because, to be honest, they're very highly qualified as a lawyer, a barrister, whatever. They want to come in and give to the country that has taken them in. So I'm a bit passionate about that. But I just think it's really important that we understand people coming in and not, okay, there's the rhetoric, there's the right-wing rhetoric, which says they're freeloaders, they're coming in to get the benefits. They don't want the benefits. They want to give back. And if we got them in working, do you know what? We've got that family for life. They're going to pay taxes. They're going to be here. They're part of the communities. And the vast majority of them are very much part of their community and wanting to give as much as they can. So do you know what? I think we should welcome them with open arms.
Thank you for clarifying that, because exactly that rhetoric of you're coming to take our benefit, actually most of them don't qualify for any sort of benefit from the UK government at all. If anything, and even access to certain services they've got to pay. So, it's in our best interest, and if they're paying their taxes and trying to work out their papers while they work here legally, then we can be able to address that gap in terms of filling those jobs, those crucial essential jobs, and making sure that the economy continues to go on, and thrive, if that as well. Now, given your role, your position within, so as a shadow environment minister, um, what are your thoughts about how Wales can capitalize on its natural energy resources while protecting local communities, especially with fracking and everything like that? Because, there's a bit of negativity attached to that without people understanding the essence. They understand the essence, but nobody wants it to be done locally, very close to them. Do you know what I mean? So how do you see that, and, being beneficial to the communities, but also actually capitalizing on what's already there and being able to do good as well?
So in terms of, if you think of the geography of Wales, and I always say, if you actually flattened out Wales, I'm sure we'd be bigger than England because the hills are, but just flattening out, we'd be a lot bigger. But don't forget, we've got three sides of the islands, if you like. So we've got wind, we've got solar, and we've also got tidal. So there's an awful lot going on there. We're also talking about small nuclear reactors as well. But do you know what? The renewables is perfect for Wales because we've got the mountains where you can put the wind turbines onshore and you can take the wind offshore. So we've got floating offshore wind coming in. We've got an awful lot of stuff going on there, which is brilliant, because what we need is an energy system that's reliable, that's not subject to the whims of people like Putin, people blowing up gas pipelines and whatever. We need to have our own secure energy pipelines, and that's solar and that is wind. And I think Wales is perfectly placed for actually bringing those in. I want to see a lot more tidal as well, because obviously tidal, we can predict a tide 200 years in advance. It's not like, is the sun going to, shine? Is the wind going to blow? Tidal is going to happen twice a day, every day for the next, however many generations. So I think we need to amplify that. And that requires seed funding, pump priming. It means we need to get things started. But once we've got it, we are literally self-contained in terms of, if we can, obviously we share it with England, that's not a problem. But in terms of where we're going, it's why would we not make the most of our natural resources?
Yes, and we must, especially, I think, in terms of striking the balance between sort of the environmental protection and economic necessity, because sometimes, there can be a challenge and a struggle to kind of get the balance right. Sometimes you might think, oh, yes, we need this because it's going to produce this and economically benefits the local community, benefits the government or whatever it is. But how do we strike that balance? How do you see us striking that balance? Because especially with all the changes within climate change and everything like that, how do we get that right?
I think that's why I'm saying the push to renewables is so important, because let's be honest, in Wales, certainly in my valleys, we've had mining, we had steel. Now, okay, we still got some steel, not as much as we did, but mining, I mean, Reform want to reopen the mines. Why would you do that? I've treated, as a physiotherapist, I treated miners with pneumoconiosis, silicosis, and all the rest of it. they died in agony. Why the heck would you want to put people back down a mine? That's absolutely ludicrous. When we've got clean, green energy, which we just need to harness, and that means one of the big things is getting it hooked up to the grid, the electricity grid, to make sure the connections from wind and solar and tidal come in and they can be accessed via the grid. Battery storage is important as well, because if you've got a lot of sun, you need to be able to harness it and capture it. Same as the wind, harness it, capture it, and then release it at a time when the wind isn't blowing. And those things are actually coming on stream now, literally. So I think it's really important we acknowledge our history. We've still got, coal tips which are dangerous. We need to make sure we make those safe. We've got communities which were devastated by mining. Aberfan disaster happened, oh gosh, how many years ago? Decades ago, but this week. So it's really important we remember the Aberfan disaster, and make sure it can never happen again. And I think that's another important thing. The legacy of the coal tips, we must make it safe. But also we need to make sure we go forward in terms of renewables and clean green energy.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruth. So I'm going to take you a few steps forward. So looking ahead in terms of your priorities for, I know we're literally 3 months or 2.5 months to the end of 2025, but 2025 and beyond. Now, in terms of all the emerging issues, the economic stagnancy, we talked about, issues and difficulties within NHS and healthcare. Plus or minus now we've got, obviously digital transformation, health inequalities, and climate change and resilience. And especially, if you're talking about Wales, for the same reasons what we talked about, natural gases and everything like that. What are your thoughts in terms of that sort of segment moving forward, and how would you, what do you think would it would look like, for example, in Wales for 2025, 2026 and beyond?
So in terms of looking ahead, obviously we've got Rachel Reeves's budget coming up at the end of November. And that's going to be a time where there's going to be a reset, and we'll be looking to see where are we going in terms of our economic stability. I mean, her number one is stability, and I understand that completely. And then Keir's number one is growth. So you've got to have a solid base to build on to grow. And I understand that completely. But what we do need to do is ensure that working people have hope, because you can have all the stability and all the talk about growth, but if you haven't got hope, then people they do literally lose heart. And I think that's really important. We give a message to people to say, do you know what, Labour's on your side. Labour is the party of the working person, and I think sometimes that gets lost in a narrative. But the stuff we're doing, the employment rights bills, working towards making things safer on the streets for everybody, making sure we're investing in our towns and cities so the centres are regenerated. All those things are really important. Jobs, yes, of course, but not just jobs at any cost. We want decent jobs which are well paid. You may have you have to upskill maybe for them, and we also want sticky jobs, in that if a company comes to a place, they don't just take up all the grants and aid, stay for a year and then disappear. We want jobs that will be there for the next 20, 30, 40 years, and I think that's really important as well for communities.
I think if what you've just mentioned, if we have all of those right and sorted, I think we'll be on the way to great wins and great improvement. So, in terms of your hopes for the next phase of the Welsh devolution, what are your hopes for that in terms of the Welsh devolution and also UK cooperation and actually having the balance right? What are your hopes with regards to that?
So I think at the moment we've got a Labour government at both ends of the M4. So in the Senedd, we've got a majority, we've got a Welsh Labour government, and obviously here in Parliament, we've got a Labour government. And they're working together really well. Now, we have elections coming up next May. We've got a by-election tomorrow as well for the Senedd. So it's a bit of a critical time. There are all sorts of unsettling things. And it's difficult because Labour has effectively been in power in Wales since 1999. okay, a couple of times in coalition or whatever, but basically a couple of years out. But they've been in power that time. So it's always hard to sort of be in power and then fight, because there's no change rhetoric. You've got to say, is it more of the same, or are we more dynamic going forward? So we've got the fight of our lives going on coming up to next May's elections. And Scotland would say the same. It's important that we demonstrate Labour values, our core values, to the people of Wales. And I think we need to get that message out very clearly. Like I said to you about hospital car parking and pre-prescriptions, people of Wales take those for granted. Yes, but what they don't realise is people in England don't have those benefits. So we need to keep banging the drum to say, this is what the Welsh Labour government has done for you. And this is what they could do in the future. So we need to have a look back and a remember of our history, but also, where are we going? What are we doing in the future? So in terms of campaigning, where can we take Wales next? And I think it's exciting, but it's a bit scary as well at the same time, because there's lots of unknowns at the moment.
And that leads me quite nicely to what you've mentioned about the changes going on. I know in May 2026, next year, for yourselves, the Senate and also the voting will change quite significantly in terms of the structure and how it works and things like that. How do you think, how the Labour Party in Wales, for example, planning for the next election, given the polls, but also that the polls are stacking against, them quite considerably? What are your thoughts? What do you anticipate the greatest challenge for this would be?
I think the biggest challenge will be the protest vote of saying, do you know what? You've been in for 25, 26 years. I'm just going to say, no, I don't want you anymore. And I think that's my worry. It's not, I want this instead. It's just, I don't want you. But well, what do you want instead? And there is a far right rhetoric of, do you know what? I'm going to come in and protest. Well, you can't protest if you're the government. You have to have clear, coherent plans and strategies. And going forward, you've got to know where you want to be in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time. And I think that's what frightens me, is the fact that people can come in as a disruptor. And we've seen it in the past in Wales. So in the Senate, it was in the Assembly in the olden days. We've had UKIP, and they came in essentially as a disruptor. They didn't last long. They lasted 1 term, but it's enough to disrupt things and stop things going forward as fast and as effectively as they should have done. And I think that's what worries me, is we could have a big disruptor there. And I think that would be an issue for the whole of Wales, because you're always conflicting, you're fighting an internal battle within the Senate rather than looking outward. And the people of Wales will say, well, what have I voted for here? The voting system is complex, and trying to explain that to people, Mr. Smith on the street, it's very difficult to explain how your 1 vote translates into 6 seats. I struggle, and I know what I'm doing, but it is difficult. It is difficult.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. I'm going to pause because I think just to give everyone online an opportunity to ask questions, and then I'll round up. So I would ask our moderators just check the chat box and actually let us know the questions in order of as they've come in and how Ruth would answer those questions, and then we can move on as well. Would that be okay, please, to just go through the questions? And then, okay, so now in terms of questions, so we've got a question, well, a comment from Ben. I think I'm just going to read through. He says, brilliant to hear a political leader talk about social care. So well done. Thank you, Ruth, for talking about social care. Ben did say, and ask questions away, please. We've had a lengthy conversation, I think, for 30, 40 minutes, and we'll round up in about 10 to 15 minutes. So your questions will be very useful for Ruth. If you've got any questions or any comments or any feedback at all based on what we've discussed about, it would be really good to hear your voice as well and your input in this. So there's a question from Alistair. It says, good evening. He's from the Road Haulage Association and just back from the Senate, where he held a reception yesterday yesterday evening, hearing from Jack, Sergeant AM, and others. As with social care, recruiting younger people into the sector was a key part of the conversation and is a big concern for Welsh hauliers. My question is how, or indeed whether, the Welsh Affairs Committee looks to the Senate and AMs to help set its agenda and to identify which policy areas to work on. That's his question. I'll pause so you can answer, and then I'll read the next.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you, Alistair, for the question. And we work quite closely with the Senate. In fact, I've appeared on their, oh gosh, I'm going to get it wrong now, but their Equalities Committee, looking at prisons. We were looking at prisons and probation because we're running an inquiry into prisons, and they were looking at the health and education aspects of it, because obviously there are devolved powers and there are retained powers. So on the Welsh Affairs Select Committee, we look at the retained powers, so justice and immigration and defence, all those sorts of things, and then we will make sure that we do not. It's not interfere, it's the wrong word, but we work in collaboration with the Senate to make sure that what they're doing in terms of health and education and other devolved issues, we don't step on their toes. We'd like to work in lockstep with them to make sure that we cover all the areas. So, for instance, they're one of their leaders in terms of their committees on health. We did a cross-border inquiry, and he came along to ask questions on our committee as a guest, and I've guested on their committees. So, we do work closely together, and because members of the Senate and members of Parliament, we get together fairly often, and it's quite good to just chew the fat and go over what's important, and you deal with that, but we'll back you up, or vice versa. And it's really important. It's a partnership, really, and that's the way it should be going forward.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ruth. Alistair, I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, please let us know in the comment section. And then there's a question from Ben. So Ben says, as the chair of UKAI, the trade association for AI in the UK, the natural resources of Wales are incredibly attractive for investors in assets like data centers. Given that Ruth has said on the attractiveness of Wales from an energy perspective, what is the opportunity to put Wales at the front of future technologies such as AI? And how is that impacting your constituency and Wales more generally in places where there are great grid connections such as South Wales? How do we get people into those jobs ASAP? Unlike the Southeast, Wales would be one of the fastest growing economies in the UK. Great to hear your thoughts, Ruth.
Oh, well, Ben, that's brilliant. Yeah, you're obviously very knowledgeable about data centers and things like semiconductors. Fabulous, brilliant. We in my patch, I'm very proud of the fact we got the largest semiconductor compound semiconductor cluster in the UK. Really, really important. And alongside them, we've got at least 3 data centers, one being built and 2 up and running. So these are the clean, green AI jobs of the future. And we need to make sure we've got sufficient people with the right skills in the right place at the right time. And I think that's one of the critical things is we're looking at children and young people coming through, making sure they've got STEM, so they can come into the jobs or university apprenticeships. We've got all of these things which we need to get together. It's really, really important because, yeah, you're right. Data centers, they're very power hungry. So we need to make sure that our renewables are there. And in terms of Newport, I'm just going to bang the drum for Newport because I can. Fatima can't stop me at the moment. But on Newport East, on the other side of the river from Newport West, we've got a big battery centre which is just about to come online. So it will literally store energy which can then be released at another time. And that's a fantastic place to go. Oh, do you know what? We can now harness our renewables and make sure we can release them at 2 o'clock in the morning when there is no sun or whatever. And I think it's really important that we have but the grid connections are critical. And in South Wales, we're well placed. In North Wales, they're fairly okay, but it's the middle You know, Wales has a middle, which is fantastic. It's got a ridge of mountains, brilliant for renewables, but there's no grid. So to get it in is a really, really difficult job. So we need to be doing that job, but we need to get it done quickly. We can't wait 5 years. We need to wait 2 years max. We need to get it done.
Fantastic. And Ben also asks, investment in AI in Wales, perhaps. Any heads up from Ruth on the budget?
Oh, I tell you what, if I knew
Get your
Ben, I
tarot
would
card
tell you.
out. Get your tarot card out, or your crystal ball, I suppose.
Absolutely, yes. No, that's the one thing every journalist, every reporter, what's in the budget? I don't know. I am not in the Treasury team. The first thing I will know is the night before the budget, if I'm lucky. Then last time I was invited into number 11 to be part of Rachel's. She didn't tell us details. She just told us directions and strategic intent. I will not know the detail until you know the detail. So sadly, I'm sorry, Ben, there's no tarot cards, there's no crystal ball.
That is my take, the tarot card and the crystal ball. I think Ben definitely wanted to know, but thank you for your response. And then there's another question from Ross. Ross from Wales and West Utilities, the gas distribution network, transporting gas to 7.5 million people across the whole of Wales and southwest of England. Ross says, we have our HQ in Newport, you'll be pleased to know. Great to hear from Ruth today. We're helping to shape the hydrogen economy in Wales as a green source of sustainable energy for industry with green skills and jobs for the future, and to offer choice for households in the energy transition going forward. What role, what role will the Welsh Affairs Committee play in ensuring that Wales does not get left behind in the energy transition, Ruth?
Well, Ross, that's a really good question, and I do know the Wales and the West Utilities headquarters because it is in my patch, and I've been several times, and I've met with the unions as well as management to talk about. Because it's a massive patch. I mean, if you think about, it was Wales and the Southwest, so it is a massive patch. Very, very important. And to be honest, we haven't actually got anything on the horizon for the Welsh Affairs Select Committee looking at energy, which I'm thinking now, making a mental note to myself, we need to look at it because obviously energy prices, social tariffs, how do we make things fairer for people? Those are all big issues because fuel poverty is a massive issue. People who are in work and they still can't afford to put the heating on is a massive issue, alongside all the stuff like the retrofitting and making sure the houses are fit for the future. And I think it goes hand in glove because the energy companies should be working with the housing associations to make sure that houses are fit for purpose. They are insulated. They have got the solar panels. They have got the things that they need. But you make a really good point, and I'm just thinking I'm going to make a note, and maybe in the new year you might see that we're going to do an inquiry into energy. So thank you for that. I'm going to steal that idea.
Well done. So Ross, you did have a bonus point there, a brownie point. I think any other questions? So Bernard says, he said, thank you, Mystic Ruth. This is really helpful. So he should be coming down to Newport soon to see what's going on. And we're launching a report on energy infrastructure shortly. So happy to discuss more, he said. So that's any more questions, anyone? We still have a little bit of time, at least 5 minutes. If not, then I would round up because I know Ruth has to go. Work beckons and work calls. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat box. We're still around for a few minutes, but I wanted to say thank you so much to everyone that's actually taking their time out to attend. Sort of the key takeaway from this is obviously, talking about the difference between, the Welsh Affairs Committee, what does that look like and how does that sit in within Westminster, talking about Ruth's journey as an MP, but also professionally, how she got to politics and now as an MP since, for a good few years now, and talk about also NHS, the health service. What does that look like? The challenges, the highs, the lows, and actually how we cannot have a national health service without sorting out social care. And it's really important. And I know someone else mentioned it, I think it was Ben, that is really also refreshing to myself as someone who's worked in the sector for a long time. As I've mentioned, when you hear, a politician talk about health service and NHS and actually have that sort of depth of knowledge about it and how it works. So thank you so much, Ruth. We've also talked about obviously the green energy. What does that look like? The digital transformation and actually the natural gases within Wales. We've actually also alluded to, we've got a few questions about how does the energy, what would the natural energy resources, how would that be implemented, but also structured while also protecting local communities and striking the balance between, the environmental protection and economic necessity. And we've taken a few questions, Q&As. Some of them have been very insightful and all of them have been very important to ask. So I want to thank all of you for attending today. We did make it happen, even though we did have to do the conversation online, but I'm sure you've got the depth of it, and hopefully we would have Ruth in person when she's next available to continue the conversation and meet some of us in person. And also, if you wanted to join in online, that would also be an opportunity that you could have as well. But to continue the conversation, I would ask you, all of you, to follow Chamber UK Politics UK. They're all on the social media, and also the 1987 committee in terms of what we do as a network and as a committee as well. Sign up to our events. We do host quite a lot of events, and this depth and breadth of conversation and actually rubbing minds and actually holding politicians to account, and asking those sort of key questions that you don't generally get to ask. So thank you so much for taking your time out to join us, and we look forward to seeing you next time for one of our events and joining us in person if you can make that. Thank you very, very much. I do appreciate your time and your effort. So I'm just going to check if we have any last minute questions, Ruth, and then thank you, Ruth and Fatima. Very insightful conversation to hear. Okay, Mukhtar says, thank you, Ruth and Fatima. Very insightful conversation to hear as a postgraduate student. And thank you, Fatima, for facilitating and very interesting conversation. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you so much. And we look forward to hosting you again and to hear from you and continuing the conversation. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Fatima, and thank you everybody for your contributions tonight. And online is great, but in person is even better. So yes, please. Thank you.